I am a shame to my family. At 56, I have nothing, only debt and rent to pay. I have been practicing how to say this for a long time. Not out loud, not to anyone who could actually hear me, but in my head, in the quiet moments, in the space between falling asleep and actually sleeping, when your mind does the thing it does where it replays everything you wish were different. I have been rehearsing this conversation with myself for years, maybe decades, turning it over and over, finding different ways to start it, and then pulling back before it got too real, before the words became something I actually had to live with having said. But I am done pulling back. I am 56 years old and I am done pulling back. Because the pulling back has not helped. The silence has not helped. The performance of being fine when I am not fine has not helped. So here it is. The real version. The one I have never said out loud to anyone. I am 56 years old. I have nothing. I have debt and I have rent, and I have the fear that lives in my chest like something permanent, like something that moved in so long ago that I have almost stopped noticing it is there. And I feel in a way that is specific and relentless and very hard to shake that I am a disappointment to the people I love most, that I have let them down, that the life I have lived, for all its effort and all its sacrifice and all its showing up, has not produced what a person who loved his family should have produced. That is what I carry. That is what I want to talk about today. I want to start with the word shame, because it is the word that sits at the center of everything I am going to say, and I think it deserves to be looked at directly rather than approached from the side. Shame is not the same as guilt. Guilt says, I did something wrong. Shame says, I am something wrong. Guilt is about an action. Shame is about an identity. And the particular shame I have carried for most of my adult life is not the shame of a single mistake or a single bad decision. It is the shame of a condition. The shame of being a 56-year-old man who cannot provide, who cannot protect, who cannot point to anything built or owned or secured as evidence that his decades of effort meant something in the concrete, material, financial sense that this culture uses to measure whether a man's life has amounted to anything. That shame is not occasional. It is not something that comes up in certain conversations and then recedes. It is the water I swim in. It is the air I breathe. It has been for so long that I have learned to function inside it, to move through my days with it, present the way you move through a room where the furniture is arranged wrong. You stop noticing it consciously, but you are always navigating around it. I grew up in a family that did not have much. My parents were working people, genuinely working people, the kind who left the house before dawn and came home after dark, and still sometimes came up short at the end of the month. I did not grow up thinking of us as poor. Poor was a word for other people, for situations more dramatic than ours. We had food, we had a roof, we had each other. What we did not have was margin. There was no cushion, no safety net, no reservoir of resources to draw from when something went wrong. When something went wrong, you figured it out with what you had, which was usually not quite enough, and you made it work anyway. And then you went back to the business of making it to the next month. That was the economic reality of my childhood, and it was so normal to me, so completely the only reality I had ever known, that I did not understand until much later in life that it was teaching me something, that it was installing in me a set of beliefs and behaviors and reflexes around money that I would carry forward without ever consciously choosing them. I started working at 15, not because anyone forced me to, but because contributing was what you did when you were old enough to contribute, and your family needed it. I took whatever was available, which in my neighborhood at that age was not much. Yard work, helping a neighbor move, stocking shelves at a small grocery store that has long since closed. The money was not significant in any financial sense, but the habit was. The habit of working, of showing up, of trading your time and your body for money. That habit became the central organizing fact of my existence from the age of 15, and it has never stopped being that. I am 56 years old, and the habit is as strong as it ever was. What is different is the relationship between the habit and the result. At 15, working was supposed to be the beginning, the foundation, the thing you did while you figured out what you were building toward. At 56, I am still doing the same thing, and I have not figured out what I was building toward, and the building has not happened, and the foundation is all there is. I did not go to college. This is not a regret I have spent much time performing in front of others, because performing regret about things you cannot change is one of the more useless expenditures of emotional energy available to a person. But it is a fact that shaped everything that followed. Without a degree, without credentials, without the kind of professional network that comes from higher education, the jobs available to me were the jobs available to someone with my specific profile, which is to say, the jobs that required your body. Manual labor, warehouse work, construction, delivery, the whole catalogue of physically demanding, modestly compensated, limited ceiling employment that keeps the country running and gets very little acknowledgement for doing so. I was good at those jobs. I want to say that clearly because I think it matters. I was not a marginal employee. I was reliable, I was strong, I worked hard, I did not complain, I showed up when I said I would show up. The jobs I held did not reflect the limit of what I was capable of. They reflected the limit of what was available to me, given where I started. The wages those jobs paid were wages designed for survival, not for building, not for accumulating, not for the kind of long-term financial planning that produces security and stability over decades. They were wages that covered the basics when nothing went wrong, and fell short when something did. And something always went wrong. That is not pessimism. That is the arithmetic of a life lived without margin. When you have no cushion, every unexpected expense is a crisis. When every unexpected expense is a crisis, every crisis produces debt. When every crisis produces debt, you spend years paying down what went wrong instead of building what you want. And when you spend years paying down what went wrong instead of building what you want, you arrive at 56 with nothing built and a very long list of things that went wrong. I want to tell you about the moment that lives in my memory most clearly, the moment I come back to when I try to understand, with full honesty, the shape of what my life has become. It was a Sunday evening, about 2 years ago. My sister had invited me to dinner, a family dinner, the kind we have a few times a year, her house, everyone around the table, the kids, the noise, the particular warmth of a family that has stayed close despite everything. I had been looking forward to it all week, not just because I was going to see people I love, but because it was a few hours when I did not have to think about the things I was always thinking about. The bills, the rent that was due in 11 days, the credit card that I had been making minimum payments on for 3 years and that had not gone down in any meaningful way despite every payment, the overtime I had been trying to pick up, and the body that was telling me, at 56, that it had limits it did not used to have. I got in my car, which is a 2009 sedan, with 160,000 miles on it, and a check engine light that has been on for so long I have genuinely stopped registering it, and I drove to my sister's house. I walked in, and there was the noise, and the warmth and the smell of food and everyone talking at once the way families do. And for about 20 minutes, I was just there, just present, just a person at a family dinner on a Sunday evening. And then my brother-in-law, who is a good man, genuinely a good man, no bad intention in anything he said, started talking about a home they were thinking of buying, an investment property. They already owned their house, had owned it for 12 years, had built equity, were now in a position to think about a second property as an investment. He was explaining the process, asking me a question about what I thought, including me in the conversation the way you include someone you respect. And I sat there at that table, in my sister's house that she owns, surrounded by the evidence of a family that had built something, that had accumulated something, that had security, and I felt the specific and devastating sensation of being on the other side of a glass wall, there, present, included, and also completely, quietly, invisibly separate, because I had nothing to contribute to that conversation except the nodding of someone who is pretending to be inside a world he is actually outside of. I drove home that night and sat in my car in the parking lot of my apartment building for a long time before going inside, not crying, not having any kind of dramatic moment, just sitting with the full and unobstructed weight of where I was, 54 years old at the time, renting, in debt, no savings, no plan. My brother-in-law talking about investment properties and me nodding like I understood from experience what that world was like. And the feeling that sat on top of everything else heavier than the financial reality itself, was shame. Not about the money exactly, about what the money or the absence of it said about me as a member of my own family, as a brother, as a son, though my parents are gone now. As the person my family looks at when they look at me, and whatever they see, whatever the expression in their eyes is, however kind and however without judgment it is, what I see in it is the gap. The gap between what I should have been and what I am. That gap. I drove home carrying that gap, and I have been carrying it ever since. I want to talk about what it means to feel like a shame to your family, because I think this particular experience is one of the loneliest there is and one of the least spoken about. We talk about financial struggle in terms of numbers. We talk about debt levels and credit scores and savings rates and all the quantifiable evidence of a financial situation. What we talk about much less is what financial struggle does to the relationships that matter most to you. What it does to the way you show up in your family. What it does to the holidays and the birthdays and the moments when someone you love needs something and you cannot provide it. What it does to the specific kind of love that wants to protect the people it loves and is unable to do so in the ways that feel most concrete and most real. I have a niece who is going to college next year. She is smart and she is determined, and she is going to do something with her life that I am genuinely proud to witness, even from whatever distance I end up watching it from. When she told me she had gotten accepted, I felt two things simultaneously. Joy that was completely real, and a shame that was equally real. Because in the family I grew up in the family I am part of, the older generation helps the younger generation. That is what you do. That is the point of building something. You build it so that the people after you have more than you had. My parents could not do that for me in any significant financial way. I understood that. I did not fault them for it. They gave me everything they had, which was love and work ethic and the example of showing up. But they could not give me a head start financially, and I am about to be in the same position with my niece. I cannot help her. Not in the way that would actually make a difference. Not in the way that the uncles in other families help. And that inability is not just a financial fact. It is a family fact. It is a relationship fact. It is the specific grief of loving someone and not being able to give them what you want to give them. Let me be honest about the debt, because the debt is the part of this story that I have been most ashamed of, and therefore the part I have talked about least, which means it is probably the part that most needs to be said. I have been in debt my entire adult life, not in the dramatic bankruptcy-level way that makes headlines, in the grinding, persistent, low-level way that does not make headlines, but that shapes every financial decision you make and every relationship you have with money. Credit card debt that accumulated during the years when the income was not enough to cover the expenses, which was most years. Medical bills from the times I did not have good insurance and something went wrong with my body, which happened more often as the decades passed and the physical work took its toll. Personal loans taken out to handle emergencies that the credit cards were already too maxed to cover. The debt changed form over the years, but it never went away. It was always there, always exerting its particular gravity, always taking a portion of every paycheck before I could do anything else with it. The thing about carrying debt for this long is that it stops feeling like an emergency and starts feeling like a permanent condition. In the early years, I treated each debt as something to be solved, something temporary, something I would get out from under, and then live differently. In the middle years, I treated it as a problem to be managed, something I was working on, something that would eventually resolve if I just kept making payments. In the later years, in the years I am living now, I have sometimes been guilty of treating it as just the way things are, just the permanent landscape of my financial life, something that is as much a part of my existence as my address or my job. And that normalization, I know, is its own kind of danger, because when you stop treating a problem as a problem and start treating it as just reality, you stop trying to solve it. And the debt does not stop growing just because you have stopped treating it as an emergency. The rent is the other character in this story. I have been renting my entire adult life. Every year the rent goes up. Not always dramatically, not always in a way that produces a crisis in that particular month, but consistently, relentlessly, in the direction of more. And every year that I pay rent is a year in which that money goes somewhere that does not come back to me. It does not build equity. It does not produce any asset that I will one day own. It pays for the right to stay in a place that belongs to someone else, and then the next month I pay again for the same right. I do not say this with bitterness about my landlord or about the concept of renting. I say it as a financial fact with real consequences. The money I have paid in rent over the past 30+ years, if it had been going toward a mortgage instead, if that had been possible, if the circumstances of my life had been such that home ownership had been within reach, that money would represent something today. Equity, an asset, something. Instead, it represents a very long series of monthly payments that produced nothing except the continued right to stay in the place I was already staying. And I am 56 years old, and I still have nothing except that right, renewable monthly, dependent on my ability to keep making the payment, which is dependent on my ability to keep working, which is dependent on a body that is aging and an economy that has never been particularly interested in the long-term welfare of people like me. I want to talk about the family piece more, because I think I touched it earlier and then moved on when I should have stayed with it longer. The shame of financial failure within a family context is a specific and complex thing that I do not think gets described accurately very often. It is not simply the shame of not having money. It is the shame of occupying a particular position in a family story. The position of the one who did not build what others built, the one who needs rather than provides, the one whose presence at the family table is an occasion for quiet, loving, well-intentioned concern, rather than the kind of easy, uncomplicated presence that comes from knowing you are holding your own. My family loves me. I want to be clear about that. My sister loves me. My nieces and nephews love me. The people who have known me longest and know me best, they love me. They do not love me less because of my financial situation. They have never once made me feel judged or lesser for it. Not explicitly, not in any way I could point to and say, there, that is the judgment. The judgment is entirely internal. The judgment is mine. But it is not less real for being internal. In some ways it is more real, because it has no exterior form to argue with. No specific thing I can address and respond to. It just lives in me, in the way I experience every family gathering, in the particular quality of my attention when money comes up in conversation, in the split-second calculation I make every time someone invites me somewhere about whether I can afford to participate without it showing, without the gap becoming visible. That calculation is exhausting. That calculation is something I have been making for decades, and it has cost me not in money, but in presence, in the ability to be fully there, fully with the people I love, without the constant management of what they can and cannot see. I want to talk about work one more time because I have mentioned it throughout this conversation, but I have not said the thing about it that I think most needs to be said. I am proud of my work. I want that to be on the record, clearly and without qualification. I am proud of the fact that I showed up. For decades, through circumstances that would have given other people legitimate reasons to stop showing up, I showed up. I am proud of the physical capability I have maintained, the willingness to do hard things, the reliability that every employer I have ever had has been able to count on. Those are real things, and they belong to me, and no financial outcome can take them from me. But I'm also honest enough to say that pride in the work and satisfaction with the results of the work are not the same thing, and I do not have satisfaction with the results. I have decades of physical labor, and very little to show for it financially, and a body that is starting to remind me, with increasing frequency and decreasing subtlety, that it will not be able to do what it has been doing indefinitely. And the combination of those two things, the diminishing capacity and the absence of anything built, creates a specific kind of urgency that I feel now in a way I did not feel 10 years ago or even 5 years ago. The urgency of a person who is starting to understand that the time horizon is real and finite, and that the things that have not been done cannot be deferred indefinitely, because the capacity to do them is not infinite. Let me say something about retirement, because for people my age it is impossible to have this conversation without eventually getting to retirement. The word itself has a quality of unreality to it when I apply it to my own life. Retirement, the cessation of work. The period of life when the things you built are sufficient to sustain you without continued labor. When I try to apply that concept to my specific situation, when I try to imagine the actual logistics of a point in my life, when I stop working and live on what I have accumulated, I run into the same problem every time. I have not accumulated anything that could sustain me. The Social Security benefit I will eventually be eligible for is not enough to cover my basic expenses in any city in this country where I would want to live. I have no pension. I have no meaningful retirement savings. What I have is the capacity to keep working. And the question of what happens when that capacity ends is a question I do not have an answer to, and that I have spent years carefully not thinking about, because thinking about it produces a fear that is not useful if I cannot also produce a solution. But I am thinking about it now. I'm forcing myself to think about it now, because not thinking about it has not made it go away, and the years remaining before it becomes an immediate crisis are fewer than the years I have already spent not thinking about it. And what I think, when I let myself think clearly, is this: the situation is serious and it requires honest engagement, and the honest engagement has to start now, not when I have more money or more time or more energy or more whatever it is I have been waiting for permission to not have before I start. It has to start now with what I have, which is not much, but which is something, and something is always the beginning of more than nothing. I have started in the past year to do things differently, not dramatically differently. I want to be honest about that because I think false inspiration is one of the more damaging things that gets offered to people in hard situations. The story where someone hits rock bottom and has a revelation and transforms their financial life in 12 months is not my story, and it is probably not yours. My story is smaller and slower and more uncertain than that, but it is real. I started looking at my money every week. Not once a month, not when I couldn't avoid it. Every week. A consistent, deliberate, honest accounting of what came in and what went out and where the gaps were. That sounds simple, and it is simple, and it was also, for me, after decades of strategic avoidance, one of the hardest habits I have ever built. Because every week I had to look at a picture that was not comfortable to look at. And I had to look at it without immediately reaching for the rationalization, or the distraction, or the vague reassurance that things would work out. I had to just look. What I found when I looked was not a revelation. It was not some hidden pool of money that I had been missing. It was a very detailed and very honest picture of a financial life operating at the absolute margin of sustainability, with very little room for error. But here is what the looking gave me that the not looking never could: clarity. When you know exactly where every dollar goes, you have information. And information, even when it is uncomfortable information, is always more useful than the vague, anxious, deliberately imprecise alternative. I found small amounts that I could redirect. I found habits that were costing me money I had never consciously chosen to spend. I found one subscription I had forgotten about, one spending pattern that was automatic and unconsidered, one place where a small, consistent change could produce a small, consistent result. Not enough to change everything, but enough to change something. And changing something at 56, after decades of changing nothing, has a value that is hard to quantify, but that I feel every day. I also did something that cost me more than any of the practical changes, which was to talk to my sister. To actually tell her the truth. Not the managed version, not the version designed to reassure her that I was fine, but the real version. The numbers, the debt, the rent, the absence of savings, the fear about what comes next. I told her all of it, sitting at her kitchen table, the same table I had sat at for that dinner 2 years ago when I drove home, carrying the weight of the investment property conversation. I told her, and I watched her face and I waited for what I had been afraid of, which was pity or disappointment, or the specific expression that would confirm what the shame in my chest had always told me, that knowing the truth about me would change how she saw me. What I got instead was my sister reaching across the table and putting her hand on mine and saying that she had known something was wrong for years and had not known how to ask. That she had watched me carefully manage what I allowed her to see and had respected that, but had also been worried and had not known how to offer help without making it worse. She did not have solutions. She is not a financial advisor, and she does not have money to give. But she had something that turned out to be more immediately valuable than either of those things, which was the willingness to know the truth and to not let it change the fundamental thing between us, to see me clearly and to stay. That staying, that simple, ordinary staying, broke something open in me that I had been keeping closed for a very long time. I want to say something to the people who are watching this and who recognize their own shame in what I am describing. The specific shame of feeling like a disappointment to the people you love, of sitting at family tables and feeling the invisible glass wall, of loving people and wanting to give them things and being unable to give them, because the giving requires resources you have spent your life trying and failing to accumulate. I want to say something to those people that is honest rather than simply comforting, because I think they deserve honesty more than they deserve comfort. The shame is lying to you, not about the financial reality. The financial reality is real and it is serious, and it requires honest engagement, not comfortable denial. The shame is lying to you about what the financial reality means. It is telling you that the absence of money is evidence of the absence of worth, that the debt is evidence of moral failure, that the rented apartment and the empty savings account and the retirement plan that does not exist are evidence that you have failed the people who love you, that you have let them down in some fundamental and defining way. The shame is telling you that you are the problem, and the shame is lying. You are not the problem. You are a person who has been working inside a system that does not return fairly on the labor of working people, that has been doing so for decades, that has kept showing up despite everything, that has loved the people in your life as fully as you were able to love them given what you had to work with. That is not failure. That is something much more complicated and much more human than the shame wants you to believe. And the shame, for all its persistence and all its conviction, does not have the full picture. It never does. Shame never does. Shame only sees what is missing. It never sees what is there. What is there, in my life, when I force myself to look past the shame and look at the whole picture, is more than the shame allows. There are people who know me and love me. There is a niece who is going to college and who sometimes calls me when she needs to talk through something, because she trusts my judgment, even if she has never once considered my bank balance as part of the reason for that trust. There is a body that has worked hard for 56 years and is still working. There is a mind that thinks clearly and observes carefully and has learned things across a life lived close to the ground that cannot be learned in any other way. There are decades of reliability, of integrity, of being someone people could count on even when counting on me cost me something. None of that shows up in a financial statement. All of it is real. The practical situation also has more possibility in it than the shame wants me to see. I am 56, not 86. I have, barring the unexpected, somewhere between 10 and 20 working years ahead of me. 10 to 20 years of consistent, deliberate, differently behaved financial choices represent real potential for change. Not the change that erases the past, not the change that produces the retirement I should have been building since my 30s, but the change that makes the next decade meaningfully different from the last one, the change that builds a small cushion where there is currently no cushion, the change that reduces the debt incrementally but consistently until it is smaller than it is now, the change that means that when I sit at my sister's kitchen table 5 years from now, I am sitting there as a person who is honestly engaged with his own life rather than carefully managing what is visible. That change is available to me. It is not guaranteed. It requires things of me that I have not always been willing to give, which is primarily the willingness to look clearly and act consistently, even when the looking is uncomfortable and the consistency is hard. But it is available. I want to close with something about the word shame, because I started there and I think the honest ending lives there too. I have carried shame about my financial situation for most of my adult life. I have carried it in the way you carry something you cannot put down, something that has become so integrated into how you move through the world that you have forgotten what it would feel like to move without it. And I am not going to tell you that I have put it down. I have not put it down. It is still there. It is lighter than it was a year ago, lighter than it was on the night I drove home from my sister's dinner and sat in the parking lot of my apartment building. But it is still there. What has changed is not the weight of it, but my relationship to it. I have started to understand that the shame is not a fair judge, that it is a voice that was taught to me by a culture with a specific and narrow definition of what a man's life is supposed to look like. A definition that does not account for the complexity of the circumstances people actually live inside. A definition that measures everything and understands very little. And understanding that the judge is not fair does not make the verdict disappear. But it gives me grounds to appeal. It gives me the right to say, I hear you, and I disagree, and I am going to keep living anyway. I am 56 years old. I have debt, and I have rent. And I have a check engine light that has been on since 2021, and a body that is tireder than it used to be, and a savings account that does not have what it should have in it. All of that is true. And I am also a person who showed up for 56 years, who loved the people in his life as fully as he knew how, who is sitting here right now telling the truth about something he has been hiding for decades, which is its own kind of courage, even if it does not look like the kind of courage that gets celebrated. I am still here. I am still trying. I am telling the truth, and I have learned slowly and not easily, and not all the way yet, that still here and still trying and telling the truth is not nothing. It is, in fact, exactly where everything that is still possible begins. If any part of what I said today sounds like your life, if you recognize the shame or the glass wall or the parking lot moment or the family dinner where you nodded and smiled and went home carrying something heavy, I want you to hear this. You are not alone in it. The shame wants you alone. The shame needs you alone to do its best work. Do not give it that. Find one person, one conversation, one moment of honest looking at your own life, and start there. Not because it solves everything. It does not solve everything. But because it starts something. And starting something at any age in any situation is always better than staying still. That is what I know. That is all I have. And today, for the first time in a very long time, it feels like enough.
I've been trying to hold it together, but it's just not working anymore. It's breaking my heart.